Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz or at Banking Day. This week's Talking Business is brought to you by multi-award-winning law firm McDonald Legal, experts in the areas of dispute resolution and commercial and property law. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website, leongettler.com. I'm Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 4 in our series for 2023, and today's date is Friday, February the 24th. First, I'll be talking to Michael Chetner, head of Zoom Australia New Zealand, about the new Zoom virtual agent, an intelligent conversational AI and chatbot solution to help businesses connect and communicate with their customers at scale in a more efficient way. And I'll be talking to Indeed economist Callum Pickering about the latest unemployment figures. But now let's talk to Michael Chetner.
Well, Michael, tell us about Zoom Virtual Agent. How does it work?
Well, Zoom Virtual Agent is part of our suite of customer experience or CX announcements. And it's a conversational AI bot. So if you think about some of those customer service situations where you are looking at assistance or help, it draws on a body of very specialized information to be able to try and not only distinguish some of those common areas of customer support that's required related to your product, but also knowing when to divert you to human intervention or to escalate the call to someone that is a little bit more appropriate to provide a more detailed response. But it is really around the suite of, or our platform approach. Zoom certainly has been very well known for its video application. But the beauty of our platform is that we build services on top of this. And we're moving from this employee experience situation that we've been using, how to users work remotely and in a hybrid world, to extending that into a sort of B2C type of scenario around that customer experience.
And of course, that provides people with lots of flexibility, doesn't it?
Yeah, flexibility is critical. We did some research with YouGov locally, actually. That research showed a number of things. A really important one was, 79% of people feel there's a sense of loyalty to an organisation can deliver services or give this right customer and product support that they require. Ultimately, what that means is then also you provide flexible ways of connecting with your customers as well. Is that a physical interaction? Is a virtual one? Is it one that's driven by our Zoom virtual agent as well? So that flexibility around, and people also want to communicate in different ways. Some people are comfortable with text, some of them comfortable. Some people want to get on the plain old telephone, and others want to do it over the web. So it's really that flexibility. We talk about flexibility a lot. It's an interesting one around the employee side of things too, because we talk about this concept of hybrid work and providing the tools to be able to be having that flexible life for that hybrid working home life as well. So whether you're using our products at home or at work or in the cafe or wherever you are, you've got that sense of flexibility around it.
But in terms of customer experience, it can be virtual or it can be face-to-face.
Correct. And if you think about, think about the workflow here. You've got your chat, your Zoom virtual agent. You initiate that conversation. Some of the requests you might have might then get promoted to an actual customer service agent. And not only can you speak to them on voice, that gets promoted to a video call, a Zoom video call, where you can actually have a very deep interactive discussion. So basically covers all of those elements of escalation, but in a way perhaps which is a little bit better than just being on the end of a phone line, as you would sort of, is a common experience at the moment.
Well, it would allow you to actually develop a real customer engagement strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said before, that sense of, if a brand is providing me that level of service, not only that feels tailored and bespoke, but also solves and allows solves a problem very quickly, that then breeds that loyalty to that organization. So if you think about a B2C strategy organizations might have, that ability to differentiate your service offering compared to your competitors is what's going to win you customers and retain them as well.
Which is much more effective than, say, doing everything by email or on the phone.
Yeah, and these are all just channels of communication, and some people may be comfortable with that. but certainly you don't want to be stuck with one dimension of communication with your customers. And this just gives flexibility all the way to whether it be the channel of email, whether it be channel of phone, texting, or as I said, a live personal interaction as well.
How have customers taken to this?
Well, look, we've just launched last week. You may have seen that announcement. It goes hand in hand with our Zoom contact center product as well. So if you think about from a call center or contact center perspective, the ability not only to have flexibility there for your customer agents to be working from anywhere, and we've saw a lot of that during the pandemic, the ability then to use the platform or the Zoom platform in multiple ways and having that flexibility. But then coupled with the fact that we've got our Zoom virtual agent product with that contact center product as well, that allows that customer experience not only to be flexible as we've talked about, but also to be a little bit more customized and tailored to the individual. And they have different levels to that, of course.
What's interesting here is it's a completely new way of working, many people. And my thinking is what about if I run a business with some employees that really need to be upskilled in this area? How do I go about that?
Well, look, we saw the pandemic, the genie came out of the bottle there in terms of how people, well, let's call it pandemic working at that point. There was just no other option other than to work remotely and work from home. What that experience showed us is that not only do you need to provide the tools to be able to work from anywhere, it also gave us that opportunity then not only to also reach new talent, to be able to be hiring in a non-traditional way, which means not necessarily within a 40-kilometre radius of where your office is. And so then it started allowing organisations to tap into talent pools as well, and also have, in some cases, a remote-only workforce as well. From that perspective, that then allows that flexibility into the environment, not only from an employee experience perspective, also that customer experience as well, as you said.
But how effective is retraining or upskilling employees? How much do they take to that?
In terms of using the technology?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, well look, I said in terms of, let's look at it two ways. There's a formalised in-person requirement for training that we would have had back in the old days. Now, the opportunity to run ad hoc communications, and that, as I said, when we talk about channels of communication, that also extends to the employee experience. And when you talk about training, not only can I communicate ad hoc with questions on the fly or queries on the fly through a Zoom chat experience, but also we can use that same interaction to then promote into video and voice engagements as well. So I'm not sure if answering your question specifically, but the different modes of learning for individuals, the accessibility to those individuals wherever they are, and the ability to present content and share content within a pre-meeting, during meeting, and post-meeting situation just provides that flexibility to enhance, the methods of relaying that training and training materials.
And Zoom is pretty basic. Zoom is not that difficult to follow as a piece of technology.
Well, and that's the people say, when we ask our customers, why Zoom and anything else, it's because it just works.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's a fairly basic requirement to deliver a product that works, but it's not very often delivered in the way that Zoom had.
Yeah.
Video conferencing has been around in its traditional sense for 20 years, but look, the combination of high quality video and voice communications, the fact that we can leverage that from a cloud environment, and the fact that, from a proprietary perspective around delivering that service is really critical.
Yeah, and my thinking is, how will this revolutionise contact centres?
Well, what it does is that transition into customer. So when we talk about the employee experience, the B2B aspect, right? So when I'm talking to a supplier or a customer or someone within my organization externally, that allows me, to have rich conversations. But when we start extending into that CX or customer experience perspective, we then start interacting with those, you as a business then start adopting Zoom service to be able to differentiate to other competitors within your industry. So how do you get to your customers faster, quicker, and resolving their issues faster as well? Now, the fact that we can, from an employee perspective, you are having the same experience as an employee or a consumer across that EX and CX space is quite impactful as well. In another way, the unified communications as a service the stack of services that we offer within our suite extends all the way from using video all the way to the customer contact center agents as well.
Well, it would certainly make the contact center experience of customers more personable, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and there's a few trends on that we've seen over the last many years, not a couple of years. The fact of mobility and having devices that can that you use to interact with are now far more mobile, and the power of cloud. So the ability to access in the same way you'd access or any utility, the cloud utility on a device which is now mobile, then opens itself up into different ways of interaction. Now, whether that's a video call, whether that's on an app or the Zoom virtual agent, that just provides that opportunity to communicate with your customers in different ways.
And people are much more open now to AI technologies.
And and we're seeing some of those AI features come through. Now, some of the things that Zoom is looking from an AI perspective are those types of things that make a call richer, more effective, with less disruption. We have noise suppression. The jackhammers next door at the building site are automatically pulled out in terms of the algorithm that we bring through there. When we talk to customers now around when they bring their organizations back into meeting rooms, how do we frame individual faces to make them look like the conversation we're having now on Zoom at a laptop level, and framing faces and being able to reflect a more familiar environment for them as well. So those AI features are critical in terms of having productive meetings and communicating better.
Well, Michael, that's all quite fascinating, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Leon.
Now let's talk to Indeed economist Callum Pickering.
Okay, well, unemployment's increased to 3.7%. Obviously, rate rises and inflation are having an impact.
It certainly seems that way. The labour market is obviously very tight by historical standards, but it has eased a little bit over the past few months, with the unemployment rate increasing to 3.7%, which is its highest level since May last year. We've also seen a bit of a pickup in the rate of underemployment, which has pushed the underutilisation rate back up to 9.8%. Back in November, that was at about 9.3%. So that's a pretty significant shift in some of our major labour market metrics over the course of just a few months.
Now, this is the second month in a row, so is this part of a trend?
Well, potentially. I mean, most economic experts, most policymakers do expect the labour market to soften a bit over the course of 2023. And certainly the data flow that we've seen over the past couple of months would seem to be consistent with that. There is good reason to anticipate that's going to be the case. Rates are obviously increased quite significantly since the RBA began tightening policy. That's hit the household sector pretty hard. And household sector's been pretty hard from a variety of different directions, from high inflation to rising mortgage rates to falling asset prices in some cases as well. So there's good reason to believe they might pull back on their spending. And if the household sector does that, then you'd naturally expect that to flow over to the business sector and hiring activity as well.
Right. I mean, the RBA has flagged, didn't it, that unemployment could rise to 4.5% by next year?
Yeah, that certainly seems like a plausible scenario. Just to put that in context, for the unemployment rate to be about 4.5% right now, that would mean about 150,000 extra people unemployed compared to what we currently have. So that's a pretty big shift in labour market conditions over the course of a 12 to 18 month period. Certainly the economy is going to come under a lot of pressure over the next 12 to 18 months, and that could certainly be conducive to the unemployment rate increase.
Now, I mean, with the country reopening too, we're going to have to actually increase the number of jobs by 25,000 a month. We're nowhere near that at the moment, are we?
Well, certainly in the past couple of months we haven't been. Employment growth over the course of 2022 was incredibly strong. But it is true that with immigration picking up, with people flooding back into the country, employment's going to have to be pretty strong. 25,000 a month equals about 300,000 over the course of a year. And I think that's going to be quite difficult to achieve, certainly over the next 12 to 18 months, given the various challenges that we do currently face.
What about hours worked? That actually fell, didn't it?
It did. Declined by 2.1%. And this was an interesting one because it largely reflected the fact that more people than usual were taking holidays in January. And that is a trend that we have seen throughout the pandemic. So in January of 2021, 2022, and now 2023, more people than normal have been taking holidays. And given what we've all gone through over that period, who could blame them?
But so That's so that would be quite a common occurrence. So we shouldn't be too concerned about that.
Not too concerned. I mean, part of it is being driven by the fall in employment. Obviously, if employment declines, then fewer hours are going to be worked. But to a large extent, it is being driven by this holiday effect that we have seen throughout the pandemic. And that just means that the desire for holidays right now is just higher than it was in the past. And most people are choosing to do that in the warmer summer months.
Now, the biggest risk relates to the household sector, doesn't it? Because you've got high inflation and you've got rising mortgage rates and you've got falling asset prices, and they're all weighing heavily on household budgets. And so, you've got that happening combined with the rising unemployment rate.
Yeah, that's right. The household sector's been hit from a variety of directions over the past 6 to 12 months. The most obvious examples being the high inflation, which has hit a lot of non-discretionary spending. High mortgage rates are obviously well documented as well, and falling asset prices, including property, is a big part of that as well. Just to put into context the increasing mortgage rates, if you had a $500,000 mortgage, the change in rates since the RBA began hiking rates would translate into roughly $1,000 more in terms of what you're paying per month, which is $12,000 a year. So that's a big hunk of change coming out of your household budget, and it's definitely going to be the sort of thing that is going to change spending behaviour for those who are heavily exposed to those changes in mortgage rates. And with the household sector accounting for about 53% of the Australian economy, if the household sector turns bad, if they decide that they can't keep spending at the rate that they have been, then that could have some really dire impact for the broader Australian economy. While I don't necessarily think a recession is going to happen, if it was to happen, it's going to be because of the household sector and their inability to deal with the various challenges and headwinds that they're currently facing.
Well, certainly it would seem that for many people, and I would imagine for many sectors, like, for example, retail and real estate, and perhaps finance, it would feel like we are heading towards a recession, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be the case?
Yeah, it certainly could be. I mean, if you're working in real estate at the moment, I can't imagine you're having much of a fun time. Property listings declining and people reluctant to sell their homes. It certainly wouldn't be one of their busiest periods. I think there's distinct risks for the retail sector as well if household spending does come off, as I anticipate that it may. And so for certain sectors across the economy, it is definitely going to feel a little bit like a recession, even if the broader economy does avoid that.
Right, okay. And the RBA, where do you see it heading? I mean, it still will be increasing rates. I mean, they're talking about, 4.1% later this year? Yeah,
the market's pricing in around a 4.1% cash rate by August. So that would imply 3 more rate hikes of 25 basis points. That seems broadly consistent with the communication we've seen from the Reserve Bank. So they've flagged that more hikes are on the way, which implies at least 2 more hikes. And all of that seems sensible given what we have seen with inflation. The difficult task for the Reserve Bank, though, is dealing with high inflation, but also keeping the Australian economy ticking over. And they'll be closely watching the data flow, such as this labour market data, to get a sense for what impact existing rate hikes are having on Australian economic activity. And what we have seen in recent months with the data is that it does appear as though higher interest rates and the other headwinds that we are facing do appear to be impacting the Australian economy. And that means that what the Reserve Bank has done so far does seem to be working.
Right, okay. But the Reserve Bank also has a responsibility to look after the employment sector as well.
Yeah, and that's a tough balancing act. And it's going to be incredibly difficult for the Reserve Bank to get policy right in the current situation. It's going to be very easy for them to maybe tighten rates too much, or alternatively, not tighten them enough to deal with inflation and balance those unemployment risks. So I certainly don't envy the Reserve Bank Governor, Philip Lowe, right now and the sort of decisions he has to make to keep the economy on track.
Right, because it's going to be a very, very fine balancing act, very difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, there's just a high degree of uncertainty right now. We're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and that makes policy difficult. The situation is changing quite rapidly as well. The data flow is shifting as well. We've seen inflation come off quite strongly in some major economies. Certainly the US looks like it's heading in the right direction, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Australia's going to follow suit. And so it's going to be very difficult to tailor monetary policy correctly to successfully navigate this high inflation, but also the risk of higher unemployment.
Well, indeed, the RBA said that the inflation won't get back to about the target band till about 2025.
Yeah, which is a bit disturbing for a lot of Australians out there who are probably doing it pretty tough with cost of living pressures. I think on this, there is a lot of risk around the inflation outlook. That is, the situation could change quite rapidly, such that this is the Reserve Bank's best guess of how it's likely to evolve. But there could be a lot of volatility around those numbers, such that inflation could end up being considerably higher than the RBA expects or considerably lower than the RBA expects. What we have seen overseas with countries such as the United States and inflation coming off quite reasonably is that there is reason to be a little bit positive about where the inflation might head over the next 12 to 18 months. That is, there's probably a little bit of downside risk to those inflation forecasts that the Reserve Bank has put out last week.
Right, okay. Well, it'll certainly be something to watch. And Callum, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Leon.
Need legal information or legal advice? Today's podcast is brought to you by multi-award-winning law firm McDonald Legal, experts in the areas of dispute resolution and commercial and property law. For a free consultation on your legal matter, McDonald Legal can be reached on 03 9070 1107 or by visiting the website www.mcdonaldlegal.com.au. So what's happening in the news? Well, the National Australia Bank's economics team now has the Australian economy coming to a virtual standstill by mid-year. Australia will be flirting with recession. On GDP, we see the quarterly rate of growth slowing to around 0.1% in mid to late 2023, the team noted. Over the calendar year, the NAB sees Australia's economy muddling along before demand picks up a little next year. That sees through the year growth slow to just 0.7% in 2023 and 0.9% in 2024, before around trend growth of 2.2% in 2025. That relies, though, in the NAB's view, on the Reserve Bank easing monetary policy or cutting interest rates early next year. And superannuation tax concessions worth $53 billion could be overhauled by Treasurer Jim Chalmers in an attempt to repair the budget bottom line as the government moves towards blocking early access to retirement savings. Chalmers said, while the government's immediate focus was on enshrining a definition for superannuation, that was not the end of the conversation about a sustainable future for the industry. Tax concessions on super are forecast to cost the budget $52.6 billion in 2022-23, just under the total cost of the age pension of $55.3 billion, according to analysis of the October budget by the Australian Institute. On Monday, the Treasurer opened a consultation on a definition of superannuation that would be enshrined in legislation. The government has suggested that the objective of superannuation is to preserve savings to deliver income for a dignified retirement alongside government support in an equitable and sustainable way. The preservation of super was to ensure superannuation contributions should not be accessed unless as retirement income, it said. Australians have about $3.3 billion in superannuation, and legislating what that money can be used for was a Labor election promise. It has been critical of the Morrison government's early pandemic policy that allowed Australians suffering financial hardship to withdraw up to $20,000 from their super, as well as a coalition policy that would give first home buyers access up to $50,000 of their super. And homes and businesses in every state in Australia's eastern seaboard are at risk of electricity shortages from 2027 as looming closures of several coal-fired power stations collide with delays in building crucial new gas and clean energy projects to replace them. In a new report released on Tuesday, the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, warns material changes to expectations of available power supplies over coming years in Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales and Queensland have reinforced the urgent need for new generation plants and other key infrastructure to be approved and rolled out. Up to 5 coal-fired power stations, including the Alone generated in Victoria's Latrobe Valley, New South Wales Liddell, Earring and Vales Point power plants, and Queensland Callide B, are expected to shut down this decade, removing 13% of the East Coast grid's generating capacity. Gaps in the market begin to emerge from 2025, AEMO warns. First in New South Wales due to Origin Energy's possible closure of Earring, then in Victoria from 2026 because of the closure of 2 gas-fired power stations in South Australia. The forecast gaps will continue to widen until all mainland states connected to the East Coast grid are forecast to breach their reliability standard from 2027 onwards. The reliability standard is a requirement for at least 99.998% of forecast customer demand to be met each year. AEMO's updated reliability forecast factor in AGL's decision to bring forward the closure of its 800 megawatt Torrens Island gas-fired power station in South Australia by several years to 2026, a 1-year delay to the construction of the Snowy Hydro 2.0 hydro project in New South Wales to 2026, and a year-long delay to the Kuri Kuri gas-fired power plant in New South Wales to 2024. And the remainder of standalone houses starting construction is set to plummet by 21% this year and to their lowest level in a decade next year, according to HIA forecasts, as rising interest rates dent demand. By 2024, housing starts are forecast to fall to 96,310, first time the annual tally is expected to dip below 100,000 in more than 10 years, marking a rapid slowdown from the 149,000 starts achieved in 2021 when detached housing boomed off the back of the federal government's home builder grant. The HIA is expecting detached housing starts to recover in 2025, albeit at a slow level, to 97,820 before climbing to 105,179 in 2026. And universities have shortchanged their staff by a conservatively estimated $83 million over the past few years, with some casuals being underpaid the equivalent of a house deposit. At least 23 universities and colleges have publicly admitted to underpaying casual staff, with the National Tertiary Education Union estimating a total wage deficit of $83,363,141 in a new report. The figure is almost certainly higher than the NTEU's estimate. The University of Melbourne, for instance, admitted in an email to staff last week that it was in the process of backpaying $45 million. The NTEU had calculated the figure to be around $32 million. Melbourne is the worst offender with 2 unresolved cases before the federal court, but Sydney University, RMIT, Monash, Newcastle and Charles Sturt all have been found to have underpaid staff by nearly $5 million or more. And consumer confidence increased by 2.3 percentage points last week to 80.4 after a cumulative fall of 8.7 points over the previous 2 weeks, according to an ANZ Roy Morgan survey. But at 80.4, the Consumer Confidence Index was still among the worst 10 results in the 150 weeks since the initial COVID-19 outbreak in Australia. And executives at REA, the parent company of realestate.com.au, have asked staff to go into negative leave in an effort to reduce costs, a worrisome omen for the rest of Australia's media and advertising industry. The ASX-listed digital real estate powerhouse has been a significant profit maker for shareholders and a breakout success story for News Corp, which owns 61% of the company. But REA announced this week the profits of the company were driven down 9% in the last 3 months of 2022, driven mainly by a huge decline in property listings off the back of rising interest rates. REA Chief Executive Owen Wilson publicly said the company would not be part of a 5% reduction in the headcount at News. And a group of the nation's biggest carbon emitters say they can slash their carbon emissions by 92% by 2050. In a major report after 3 years' work by a large range of key players, including the CSIRO, capital managers, Australian Super, industry groups like AIG and BHP, BlueScope, Orica, Wesfarmers Chemicals and Woodside Energy, among others, the group found the industry can evolve to survive in a near zero carbon future. They found that the 5 major national supply chains that supply iron and steel, aluminium, other metals, chemicals and LNG, generating around 44% of total national emissions, 17% of GDP, and $236 billion in exports, could reduce annual emissions from 221 million tonnes of CO2 in 2020 to just 17 million tonnes in 2050. The group's most eye-popping estimate is that the 30-year heavy industry transition needs about $20 billion a year to modernise industrial regions and energy systems and could generate 1.3 million jobs. If successful, Australia will not only decarbonise its industry, but may see an expansion in sectors like steel and iron, where production could rise by up to 20% by 2050. Alumina production could double, while lithium could leap more than 15-fold. By contrast, LNG production is expected to fall by 80% around 2040 onwards, as the big North Asian economies shift off fossil fuels. And Commonwealth Bank has created a watch list of at-risk companies, including across the construction, retail and commercial property sectors, and assembled a war chest of provisions to prepare for an economic downturn. The bank's business group executive, Mike Vasey-Lyle, said the lender was preparing for the worst when it put aside an additional $231 million in loan impairment provisions in its latest set of results. That took the unit's total provisions for loan losses to $263 million. Mr. Vasey-Lyle noted that while it had been a particularly good environment for the business bank in recent years, with unprecedented economic support and lower rates keeping many small and medium operations out of insolvency, that was expected to change. Mr. Vasey-Lyle said commercial property and construction businesses were of particular concern to CBA as the economy slowed. The bank recorded a 72 basis point increase in troublesome and impaired assets across its construction lending book. That took total troublesome and impaired assets to $467 million at the business bank, up from $370 million recorded in June. And the profit reporting season continues. Flight Centre's total revenue tripled to $1 billion in the year ending December compared with 2021. It trimmed losses before tax to $18 million from $270 $76 million. EBITDA swung back to positive territory at $77 million from a loss of $190 million in 2021. Worley had a statutory loss of $99 million. Santos has reported jump in annual net profits of 221% for the year ended December 31, totaling US $2.1 billion. That's $3 billion Aussie, from revenues of US $79 billion, up 65% on the previous year. Real estate investment manager Qualitas recorded its net profit at $10.7 million, up 117% from the prior corresponding period. Scentre Group's revenue rose 7.8% to $2.5 billion in the year ending December from a year ago, staking profit after tax 18% higher at $970 million. Statutory profit after tax dropped to $301 million in 2021 from $888 million a year ago. Woolworths sales rose to $33 billion, taking net profit 14% higher to $1.6 billion. Logistics software solutions provider WiseTech Global has reported a 40% jump in underlying net profit after tax to $108.5 billion. Low-cost jewellery retailer Levisa's net profit jumped 31.9% to $47.7 million in the first half FY 2023. EML Payments said operating income, EBITDA, swung to a loss of $8.2 million versus $14.2 million in the prior corresponding half. Oz Minerals' net profit fell to $207 million, down $323 million from a year ago. Hotel commerce platform SiteMinder reported a $25.5 million loss for the first half, down 71% from an $87 million loss in the prior corresponding period. Ethical Funds Management Group Australian Ethical has reported an 82% fall in its half-year profit, $961,000. AUB Group reported a net profit of $47 million in the 6 months to December from $31 million a year ago. Plumbing Business Rees Group has lifted its net profit up 18% to $186 million on sales, up 23% to $4427 million for the 6 months ending December 31, 2022. Domino's Pizza first half earnings before interest and tax fell 21.3% to $113.9 million, and underlying net profit was down 21.5% to $71.7 million. First half earnings before interest and tax fell by 21.3% to $113.9 million, and underlying net profit was down 21.5% to $71.7 million. Gold miner St Barbara has reported an underlying loss after tax for the first half of $8.6 million, compared to an underlying profit of $15.1 million in the first half of FY22. BHP's half-year profit after tax dropped 32% to US $6.4 billion. Oil and gas company Karoon Energy recorded its half-year revenue at $299.4 million US, that's $436.3 million Aussie, up by 61%. The company reported statutory net profit was US $77.6 million. Viva Energy reported record EBITDA on a replacement cost basis of $1.1 billion in the full year ended December 31, up 122% in the prior year. Stockland statutory profit dropped sharply to $301 million from $850 million in the first half of fiscal 2022. Ramelius Resources reported net profit up of $29.1 million for the first half, down from $73.4 million in the prior corresponding period. Coles reported total sales revenue growth from continuing operations of 3.9% to $20.8 million in the half year. EBIT from continuing operations was up 9.9% to $1.1 billion. Founder-led auto parts supplier ARB Corporations has posted a 31.2% profit fall to $47.4 million on sales down 5.1% to $340.8 million for the 6 months to December 31. Aged care provider Estia Health reduces net loss to $25 million in the 6 months to December from $44 million in the preceding period following easing in the pandemic. A $42.6 million impairment has dragged AMA Group to a net accounting loss of $37.2 million for the 6 months to December 31. Hello World has swung to a net profit of $1.4 million total transaction value that more than tripled to $1.2 billion for the 6 months to December 31. Internet communications business Symbio posted a net profit down 34% to $4.4 million on recurring revenue, up 5% to $57.2 million for the 6 months to December 31. Software provider Nuix has posted a net profit of $1.3 million annualised contract value, up 3.4% to $170.2 million for the 6 months to December 31. Bendigo and Adelaide Bank's cash earnings after tax climbed 22.9% to $294.7 million on a return on equity of 8.79%. For the 6 months to December 31, health insurer NOB posted a net profit up 4.8% to $91.6 million. Sydney-focused real estate agent McGrath has posted a net profit of $1.8 million. BlueScope Steel's interim net profit sank 64% to $599 million from $1.64 billion, and first half underlying EBIT was down 61% to $851 million from $2.2 billion. Gold miner Northern Star Resources has declared cash earnings up 3% to $467 million on sales up 5% to $1,949 million for the 6 months of December 31. Financial software business Iris has posted a net profit down 28.6% to $52.7 million on sales up 3.7% to $617.9 million. Charter Hall reported statutory net profit of $226.5 million for the half year. Furniture company Adairs has reported net profit of $21.8 million, a 23.9% increase for its first half 2023 financial year results. Hotels, Cinemas and Leisure Group Event Limited has posted a normalised net profit up $39.4 million, around double the prior year. Property management business GPT posted a full year net profit of $469.3 million. Ampol reported earnings for the year ended December 31 totalled a record $1.32 billion, up 124% from the previous year. Link Group expected operating EBIT of $80.2 million for the first half of the 2023 financial year. Reliance Worldwide has delivered a 4.6% rise in interim net profits to US $66.6 million. Macquarie Telecom Group has announced revenue of $172.5 million, up 16%, EBITDA $51.3 million, up 26%, and NPAT of $8.5 million, up 133%. SEEK forecast full year 2023 guidance of $1.26 billion revenue, $560 million of EBITDA, and $250 million of net profit. Best and Less's net profit slumped 32% to $13.7 million in the 6 months of December from a year ago. Jones Ling's Group's full year forecast sales revenue has been upgraded to $1.146 billion and forecast EBITDA to $111.1 million. Judo's first half profit was $53.2 million before tax, up from $12.6 million in the second half of 2022. Mining equipment producer Austin Engineering reported its net profit was up 3% to $5.4 million. Tabcorp has posted a $52 million net profit after tax for the half year to December 31. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Dan Frecklin from Baltic about the convoluted digital ad ecosystem. And I'll be talking to AMP Capital Chief Economist Shane Oliver about the reporting season. This show is brought to you by multi-award-winning law firm McDonald Legal, experts in the areas of dispute resolution, commercial and property law. For a free consultation on your legal matter, McDonald Legal can be reached on 03 9070 1107 or by visiting the website www.mcdonaldlegal.com.au. In the meantime, catch me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. And if you want, leave a comment. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business on the Apple Podcast Store or on my website leongetler.com. Wishing you all the